we have to address the angry elephant in the room. A leaked video that went viral of MSNBC's Lawrence O'Donnell. Do we have a clip of his? Do we just have the first clip?
Well, today President Trump visited Texas, but he forgot to bring any empathy with him. But he did bring a hat that is for sale.
58 seconds.
What's going on? Why am I losing this? Why don't I have sound? All right, it's back. Someone's pressing buttons and turning my sound off. Who's asking for a Labor Day rundown in my ear? Someone in that control room is out of control.
So it's you know, my heart goes out to the guy. I see it. You can see the rage building up. Yeah. And
we've all been there. You want to sympathize.
Well, I will say this. When I was at Fox News, I remember I used to be when you were in the newsroom, they didn't even have cubicles. And they would just have people, like it was a call center, answering phones behind you on their keyboards. And they were just obnoxious. Yeah. Whereas coming from the voice acting world, people are, you know, it's on air, quiet on radio. Right. So, of course, listen, the guy's still a dick. Don't get me wrong. But it changes the context a little bit. We've actually acquired exclusive audio from his earpiece, and there's a little more empathy.
Well, today President Trump visited Texas, but he forgot to bring any empathy with him. But he did bring a hat. A hat that is for sale.
I don't know. Something about
58 seconds.
What is he saying about a hat?
What's going on? Why am I losing this?
Are you not hearing us?
Why don't I have sound?
I wonder where you got that hat from. We didn't put that in the show map at all.
All right, it's back. Yeah. Someone's pressing buttons and turning my sound off.
Make sure you can hear.
Who's asking for a Labor Day rundown in my ear?
We're trying to let you know there's no story about a hat.
Someone in that control room is out of control.
No, we're trying to help you. You're out of control. You're out of control. There are people who are trying to make sure that you get your story straight, and you're talking about stuff that we didn't even put in the run.
20 seconds.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's great. Really professional.
10 seconds.
What, did you just shit yourself? I think you shit yourself. You just shit yourself before going live. There it is. Go.
So the president went to Texas. Eve Perez, who had been missing since Sunday morning.
Perez. Yeah, Perez is how you say it.
You have insanity in my earpiece.
No one's you're pronouncing it insanely. You have any idea how many Latinos
It's not my earpiece.
Perez.
It's somebody talking on our lines.
Yes, we're talking to you because you're an asshole. I'm trying to pronounce it Perez, or you're going to look like a
10
moron.
seconds.
You going to shit yourself again?
5, 4, 3.
And you go now, son of a bitch.
President Trump did not mention Sergeant Perez.
Sorry.
That won't make
today's lead. All right. Moving on. Hillary Clinton giving it. She's still in the news. We have to address it, and then hopefully, I don't. Listen. Anyone can get hit by a car. I hate to say this because it is lazy when the left's just, no one on the right is funny. I think plenty of people on the left are funny. Sure. I saw Jon Stewart stand up long before I ever watched his show. I saw him at the Just for Laughs when I was young as a kid. I got to hang out. I was very fortunate. I got to grow up around these amazing comedians. I actually think Stephen Colbert can be pretty funny. I think John Oliver can be very funny, even though I think he's wrong. Samantha Bee, not amongst them, sorry. But Trevor Noah hasn't, you've never been funny accidentally. Name that movie reference. You can tweet me at S. Crowder. But I have noticed something with late night comedy here, and I just wanted to bring it up before we get to something else. Let's let Seth Meyers see if you can spot it.
We are living through a very dark time in America, but there is also an unprecedented opportunity to pull Democrats and liberals together and to stand against the hate and incompetence in Washington. The best way to do this is to get the people who voted for you and the people who voted for Bernie on the same page. This isn't the time to complain because Senator Woodstock didn't roll over for you. Hey, if anything, he helped make you a better candidate. You know, the candidate who beat Donald Trump by 3 million votes.
Yeah. Let me ask you, did that look like a late night comedy show to you? And I'm not just saying that because I understand that maybe I don't share the same sense of humor, but they go a very long amount of time for a comedy show without a single joke.
None. I tried watching a bunch of late nights the other night just in a series. It was so hard to actually find jokes anywhere in there.
It's like they don't write them anymore. And by the way, listen, we're very open about our biases here on this show. We say, listen, this is our point of view, but I actually think that we prioritize comedy and entertainment on this show more than a lot of these late night shows. And they try to act as though they're just going after the comedy. That's what bothers me, is the lying about it. And here's what's, I don't think we've ever really done this on this show. Seth Meyers he's speaking directly to Hillary Clinton, advising on how to mobilize the Democratic base. That's the problem. And it's not that these hosts just like happen to be liberals. Like he's had Hillary Clinton on. She's been on Saturday Night Live, his show.
It's all the same building.
I've been there. I've been to 30 Rock. You have MSNBC on one floor. You have Saturday Night Live on another. You have Seth Meyers on one floor.
Fallon
you have Jimmy
on another.
Fallon. Yeah, Hillary Clinton goes there often. She just turns the elevator into a Christmas tree, stops on every floor with fruit baskets, and he's telling her how to win an election. Like it's not like you used to just be able to separate the art from the artist, right? Yeah. Like Sean Penn. He's a dick. We get it. But he's still one of the greatest actors ever.
He's good.
You can do that.
He's good.
And you're a pro comedian, right? So you have a different... I'm an average Joe, and that's not funny. I am his target market, and that's not funny at all.
Yeah, I know. But you find children's programs funny.
A lot of
so it's not necessarily fair. But the thing is,
that was a joke.
The issue is I only have so many laughs per show. They mostly go to Not Gay Jared when he poops himself. By the way, he did at the clown prank. For those who are Not Gay Jared,
he pushed a little loaf. Maybe a little.
I pooped myself just a little bit. It was mostly sweat in my pants. All right. But there's at least 3%.
We do have female viewers.
Look, we love you. It's okay.
No.
Just wipe.
In fairness, though, a good push-up or pull-up will also do the trick, just because of my condition.
It's like a tube of toothpaste.
It is.
Tube of toothpaste with no slack. He's already been rolled up. He has no colon. For people who are tuning in for the first time to this show, I don't know why you would. Not Gay Jared has no colon.
Hashtag save Jared.
We deserve to be demonetized.
You can show it. You can show them when you have it. He looks like a stripper with a C-section scar. So Seth Meyers,
That's really odd.
He's a political activist. Who's out there? He's using it's not just that he's an artist. His only form of art right now with Seth Meyers, Trevor Noah, Samantha Bee is using a platform solely for political activism. And it's activism to people who are their buddies. You know, it's not Seth Meyers just saying, hey, gee, I wish this would happen on the left. Or, hey, you know what? I really would like to see this policy. He's literally using his camera to speak directly to politicians with whom he vacations in the Hamptons.
Good thing no one's watching.
Good thing no one's watching. All right, speaking of which, something else here that we wanted to get to before we bring on Nigel Farage.
Yes.
Let's go to The View here. Now we're going from nighttime to morning, and let's hear what Joy Behar has to say. See if you can catch it.
I think the media is supposed to not report on the fact that 95% of what he says is a lie.
Well, that's... The problem with that, Joy, is that is you are doing exactly what we're talking about and pushing a false narrative.
No, it's not.
95% of what the president says is not a lie.
It's from Politifact, from Politico.
No, it's not. It's from Politico. Politico. The same thing, right?
I saw it on the Twitters.
Politico? Huh? Whitehouse.gov? It's from Politifact. All right, so to see if this is true, if 95% of what Donald Trump says is patently false,
that's a lot.
Let's go to our on-the-field fact-check reporter. All right, on-the-field fact-check reporter, is that correct? That 95% of what Donald Trump says is wrong?
False.
Okay.
By a lot, Stephen.
Thanks for expanding on it. We appreciate it. Can't afford the most seasoned reporters. So,
no. Worth every penny, though.
She brings up Politifact. Right, so we'll focus today on Politifact and Snopes, both of them. Kind of like what we did last week with the Southern Poverty Law Center. For those who missed it, go watch the full show last week. Now, why Politifact and Snopes? Because Joy Behar just said, Politifact. Like, they just say it. Hey, well, she said Politifact.
Must be true.
She said
fact is in the name.
Fact is in the name.
There you go.
Why would they lie? Why would a woman ever lie about rape?
Whoops.
Why would they lie?
Why would they lie? One of the first logical fallacies is like, why? Okay, you want me to run down the list? I mean, I can think of at least a dozen off the top of my head. Now, we'll focus on Politifact and Snopes because just like Southern Poverty Law Center, YouTube uses for defining hate speech, Facebook and Google use Politifact and Snopes to determine what is fake news, what is real. So I think actually we can bring this up. I don't think Gerald has seen this yet. This is what Joy Behar was referencing. So it's just a sort of this totality of all of their fact-checking Donald Trump,
Right.
where she's taking that and they're, okay, 95% of what Donald Trump says is false, okay?
Yeah.
So here are a few problems with that. You're going to see me looking down at my screen because it's hard for me to remember all of this. But for example, you've heard there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. Well, statistics, obviously, if you look at them, if you understand how to read them, can be very important. They're pivotal.
Yeah.
But they're very easy to manipulate, especially when you just create an umbrella, Politifact, and most people are going there to just see the green sticker of true or false, or mostly true or mostly false. And they proactively, and Your Honor, I will lay out the case, you decide, they proactively manipulate their fact-checking. Let me show you some examples. Donald Trump made the following 3 claims that Politifact rated untrue, okay? Claiming he did not support the Iraq War. They did 6 checks on that. Claims about President Obama's birth certificate. Listen, it turned out he was wrong. I'll give him that. They fact-checked that 8 times. Claims of large-scale voter fraud. By the way, he's not necessarily wrong about that. 5 checks, okay? So for 3 claims, those are 3 claims, Politifact checked 19 times. 19 untrue.
That's more than 3.
It's how it registers. It's like a violation of double jeopardy.
Yes.
19 times. I don't remember him being wrong 19 times. I have it right here, Mrs. Bueller. 19 times. All right, contrast that. Okay, Hillary Clinton, some notable Hillary Clinton claims as rated by Politifact. She claimed that she landed in Bosnia under sniper fire. That was kind of a big one. Oops. 1 fact check. She claimed she was in New York City on 9/11. That was never checked. That was never checked, never fact checked. She claimed the FBI was fine with her email use. 1 check. So for 3 claims they rated untrue, Politifact rated Donald Trump 19 times versus 2 checks for Hillary Clinton, the same number of claims. Can you see how that might start manipulating some numbers? So let's get back to Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton because that's what she's mainly using here. Some conflicts of interest right off the bat. Politifact is a project funded by the Tampa Bay Times, repeatedly has endorsed Hillary Clinton. Snopes, they hire exclusively liberal employees. I mean, you can see it from their tweets. They've nearly all actually officially endorsed Hillary Clinton. Yeah. Okay. They've also been inaccurate many times outside of the election. One of my favorites.
I love this.
Politifact rated, well, don't laugh at this because it's horrible. It's horrible. But it also is kind of funny. Politifact rated John Kerry's statement. If you don't remember this, they rated John Kerry's statement that we got 100% of the chemical weapons out of Syria. They rated it mostly true. Now, in their defense, they didn't say entirely. They said mostly true. But do you know how we know that it wasn't at all true? When Syria killed civilians in chemical attacks earlier this year.
Yeah, they're mostly dead.
That's awkward.
Kind of a biggie.
Kind of biggie.
Whoops. And they never get called on this. John Kerry, these people never get called on their bullcrap. John Kerry lying to Joe Biden with Amy's Diner, like blatantly false. I get it. Donald Trump is not always accurate. Sometimes he flat out makes stuff up. The difference is they call him on it 19 times. Joe Biden makes up a place that's been closed for 30 years. Nothing. John Kerry lies about his military, nothing. It's unbelievable.
And it's like you can just keep saying this stuff and saying it over and over again. By the way, I don't know if you looked at the chart. She was even wrong on her own chart. Mostly true. There was a percentage that was actually mostly true. That wasn't categorized as false. Only 5% was labeled true, mostly true, somewhat true. Come on. She's even messing with the data.
And facts can't be biased by definition, but when it comes to what they choose to omit, what they choose to include, can definitely be biased.
Yeah,
when it comes
context
to these.
matters.
Right. The people who are combining the facts, creating the totality, creating a picture, it's very easy to manipulate people. That's why we always say, listen, we list our references on screen, sources, go ahead. Do your research. All right. So let's take that. They've been inaccurate. Chemical weapons, Syria, kind of a big one. Let's take this back to Trump and Clinton. Okay. So Trump claimed that the national debt decreased by $12 billion in his first month. Okay. Are you following along? It's a
big number.
Gerald?
Yeah.
You've been quiet.
Nice.
I don't know if you have a frog in your throat or something.
I do. Yeah, it's out now.
You've been making out with Jordan Peterson? You sick?
Way to start another rumor.
All right. So Politifact confirmed that the statement was true. But they rated it as mostly false. Now follow me here. Because they didn't think Trump deserved to take the credit for that number.
That's incredible.
Politifact rated Clinton's statement, in contrast, about 17 intelligence agencies concluding Russia was behind the cyber attacks during the election as true. Not even mostly true. In contrast with John Kerry's, my word is my bond. Mostly true. Hillary Clinton just said flat out true. We're not even going to question it, that Russia was behind the cyber attacks. They rated it true. But they go on in that very article to say that the 17 separate agencies did not independently declare Russia the perpetrator behind the attacks, behind the hacks. So if you look and you just see true, you don't read the fine print. And then there was a lot of backlash. Some would say,
I'm confused.
some would say, rightfully so.
Kind of a story.
They issued this statement from Politifact.
It's fact.
From Politifact. It's fact. It's fact. I saw it on Snopes. And Reuters. They issued this. It said 17 intelligence organizations or 4? Question mark. Either way, Russia conclusion still valid.
That's convenient.
A beacon of truth if I've ever seen it. By the way, since that statement, seems like they're wrong about that also. When it comes to Russia.
Waiting for that amendment.
So the point here, if people haven't added this up, is that Politifact is, they're not fact-checking. They're actually fulfilling the definition of editorialization. So in Trump's case, they thought that he shouldn't take credit for the numbers, which has nothing to do with the claim. Your site's design, the system's design, is supposed to be being able to determine whether the statement itself was true or false.
Very simple.
They didn't like him taking credit, so they said false. Now, in Hillary Clinton's case, they rated it as true because even though they knew that the claim was false, they felt that the connection to Russia, which was not valid, was still valid. So this is what's important for people to know because, again, when Google, when Facebook, when YouTube, when they're using PolitiFact and Snopes to determine fake news and the Southern Poverty Law Center to determine hate speech, and really if you're Ben Carson is a hate speaker, it's important because these actually serve as foundational institutions in our country that people assume have our best interest at heart, that people assume are being truthful. So when people use the term fake news, and I know it's been diluted, it's lost a lot of meaning, this is what we're talking about. A place called Politifact, blatantly manipulating data, claims, and statistics to try and suit an agenda. So let's go back to see if we've gotten this right with our on-the-field fact-check reporter. On-the-field fact-check reporter, would you say that we are mostly correct in our statements regarding Politifact or Snopes?
I just died a little on the inside, Stephen.
Well, it almost seems as though we should use that retainer for another hire.
He's a man of few words.
Yeah, he's a man of few words. He's a man of little value, one could almost argue. We have Nigel Farage coming up after the break. Let's get to that. Oh, I'm looking forward to it.
Roosevelt, and I speak of Theodore, of course, and Wilson openly boasted that they were not obliged to follow the words of the Constitution, that as president, they could make changes on their own.
I'm Nick Gillespie with ReasonTV, and today we're talking with Judge Andrew Napolitano, whose latest book is Theodore and Woodrow, How Two American Presidents Destroyed Constitutional Freedom. Judge, thanks for talking with us.
Pleasure to be here, Nick.
In previous books, things like Lies the Government Told You, It is Dangerous to Be Right When the Government is Wrong, and Dred Scott's Revenge, you looked at different eras of American history and the way that freedom was kind of eviscerated by various politicians and powers that be. Now you're talking about Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson and the progressive era. Why does the progressive era matter so much when we're looking at shrinking of liberty?
The radical change in the relationship of the federal government to individual Americans was ratcheted up greatly in the progressive era. If we can go back a little bit, there was no relationship between the federal government and individual Americans until after the Civil War. And then the military occupation of half the country, known in some quarters as Reconstruction, resulted in a direct personal relationship between the federal government and individuals. During Reconstruction, for example, you couldn't go to the post office without permission from the military, and a lot of other draconian measures. You couldn't build a house or expand your house or repair your house if General Sherman burnt it down without permission from the federal government.
That was in the former Confederate states?
Yes. Yes. Now, in the progressive era, we find a Republican and a Democrat collaborating together, even though they barely met and didn't really like each other. The changes in that time period are radical, and they all center around one thing, and that is the Constitution somehow empowers the federal government to right any wrong, regulate any behavior, and tax any event, whether it's articulated in the Constitution, whether it can be extrapolated from the words of the Constitution or not. Roosevelt, and I speak of Theodore, of course, and Wilson openly boasted that they were not obliged to follow the words of the Constitution, that as president, they could make changes on their own. So you have two presidents who believe, this is a radical difference, Nick, from all of their predecessors, even Lincoln, that they can, from the White House, order and direct changes which will affect the lives of every American. Roosevelt started the FBI on his own, without any budgetary appropriation or legislation from the Congress. Roosevelt bought vast swaths of private property, or stole the property from the states because he didn't pay the states for it, and claimed this is now a federal land. He did all this without the consent or legislation from the Congress. Woodrow Wilson arrested people because of what they said about the World War I, not what they did about World War I, and his behavior was never checked. And they claimed they got the power to do this from their position as the head of a state, the head of a country, irrespective of the limiting factors in the Constitution.
Right, and one of the main theme of the book is that we either have a Constitution that is the law of the land or we don't.
Right.
And obviously the answer from Roosevelt and Wilson were, yeah, well, I'm the law.
Right.
So Roosevelt and Wilson, they're different parties. They come from different regions of the country when regional differences were much stronger.
Right.
You went to Woodrow Wilson, the college that he was president of.
Right.
He was a rabid racist.
Yes.
Theodore Roosevelt was a racialist in other ways. He believed in the supremacy of the so-called white races, which would preclude either, we would not have had membership in his understanding of the white race.
Correct. I would not have been admitted to Princeton if he were still president of it.
So where was their similar worldview coming from? Because they, and discuss the role of how they viewed elites.
They thought that they could uplift people's lives by telling them how to live their lives. So these two presidents and the government under them stole freedom of choice from individuals, poor as well as wealthy, and in return gave them a set of values and parameters in which they could live their lives, believing that this would uplift everybody's lives.
Are they wrong about that? Just on an empirical basis, because there were rapid increases in material circumstances for people. Certain types of diseases were eradicated.
There was great material prosperity in the progressive era. The argument of the book is it would have been vastly greater had the federal government not interfered. Neither of them would recognize the truism that government doesn't create wealth, it only consumes it. They believed that by redistributing wealth, they could spread the wealth. Of course, as we know from history, we are, as we tape this 2 days after the re-election of Barack Obama to the White House, as we know from history, the redistribution of wealth creates dependence on the people to whom it is redistributed. It doesn't incentivize them to create their own wealth. I've argued that the re-election of the president was in large measure due to the fact that nearly half the country receives most of its subsistence from the other half. Sort of Jefferson and Hamilton, the only thing they agreed on in public as far as we know. When the voters recognize that the public treasury has become a public trough, they will only send to Washington people who will promise to give them as much of the pie as they can. This began under Wilson and Roosevelt. Now, it's an odd combination. Roosevelt was born with a spoon in his mouth. Wilson was born to a middle-class family. But Wilson rose to wealth and personal prosperity through academia. Roosevelt, who never really worked the way you and I did, experienced wealth and enjoyed wealth that came from his family, and then the two of them sought political power. Neither of them ever had, excuse the phrase, to get their fingernails dirty. Right. Neither of them ever experienced participation in the risk of their own personal wealth in order to get a return on that investment. One was coddled by academia, the other was coddled by his own family, and both would meet at about the same time in the same place, which is the White House.
Who were other contemporaries of Roosevelt and Wilson who said, no, this is absolutely the wrong way to govern?
William Howard Taft is a real enigma because his presidency is filled with language and vetoes of legislation, which shows in his own mind a fidelity to the Constitution. And then, of course, William Howard Taft has the misfortune of running against Woodrow Wilson, right, where Teddy is running as a third-party candidate because the Republicans rejected him.
Right, and at this point, Taft, who had been a protege, of Roosevelt. They're now bitter enemies.
They are bitter enemies, absolutely. Roosevelt believes that the presidency should be his. Taft believes that Roosevelt should stay in retirement. And Taft, of course, was not only Roosevelt's buddy, but he worked for him. So you have Roosevelt, who's now clearly going to take most of his votes away from Taft, facilitating the election of someone he claims to dislike even more, though on paper and in reality agrees with him, Woodrow Wilson. So the question is, because Taft ends up in a very nice position after all this. He's booted out of the White House. Where does he end up? As the Chief Justice of the United States, which is tremendous power because it's lifetime power. Was this a deal? Did he know he was going to get the Chief Justiceship when he sort of sacrificed his presidency so that TR could make the comeback effort and Wilson could get the presidency? One will never know. It is Wilson, of course, who makes Taft the Chief Justice. And then as the Chief Justice, he has this metamorphosis. He starts out as a small government libertarian and ends up justifying, through the typical circuitous route that the courts have done this for generations, all the big government legislation that the Congress enacted. In terms of those who would resist the progressive era, you have a cadre of members of the House of Representatives and senators from the Midwest, not from the two coasts, because progressivism is a hotbed in California, and clearly it is in the East Coast, and it is in Chicago, almost like the hotbeds of liberal Democrats today. But you have a cadre of members of Congress from both parties and in both houses from the Midwest who meekly resist this. And then it becomes obvious to them. The longer they're there, the longer they see. What does dependency build? Votes. Right. And so they go on board to the point where today, Mitt Romney, supposedly faithful to the Constitution, can run for president saying, I'm going to maintain Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Amtrak, the post office, the long list of crazy entitlements that have bankrupted
and
us.
It's something like 49% of Americans live in households that get direct money from the government.
Right.
So this is the dependency.
Well, the tipping point is 50. I mean, once there are more of them than us, they will use the tools of the government, the legal tools of the government, to curb our liberty and extract wealth from us. I mean, to hear the president mock and belittle, for example, David and Charles Koch, each worth about $35 billion, forgetting that together they employ several 100,000 human beings. What does he want them to do? Take that $35 billion, it's $70 billion combined, and put it in a shoebox, and all those people will be out of work, and the government can take whatever it wants from the shoebox and give it away to those people who used to earn nice incomes themselves? You see, this is a problem.
What is the theory of social change? In your previous book, you were getting, it seemed more and more radical, of saying, you know, there are times where we just have to say no to the government, and you were almost implying, you know, if not violent revolution, a refusal, a kind of Thoreau-like refusal to go along and to throw your body on the machine. Well, how do we change things, or how do you think we do?
You can't really throw your body on the machine when the machine has the majority behind it. I mean, we know, for example, sometimes the machine doesn't have the majority behind it. 2 days ago, we witnessed in Colorado, for example, a referendum on the ballot which legalized the possession of marijuana by adults for all purposes. This was after the legislature had defeated it. So this is literally the people going above the government they have supposedly elected to serve them, to work for them. So that's one way you can get around the machine. But at the same day this happened, Barack Obama amassed maybe 44, 45% of the electorate behind his big government. The Constitution doesn't matter. I can give away all the wealth that I can get my hands on. So at some point this will collapse. At some point we'll be like Greece. Great portion of the populace dependent on the government, and the government unable to borrow money, and it knows it can't print anymore because you need a wheelbarrow to buy a loaf of bread, like the Weimar Republic. Where does that lead to? That leads either to dictatorship or to violence. And that will prove the wisdom. I'm not calling for a revolution. I don't want to get arrested by the feds as soon as I leave this room. But that will lead, that proves Jefferson's statement that the blood of patriots has to be sprinkled on the tree of revolution. He said once in every generation. We haven't had anything like this since the Civil War.
What are the ways to turn things around before it gets to, you know, before we tell everybody to go long and wheelbarrows?
Well, the Colorado example may be beneficial in unanticipated ways. it may demonstrate, and I'm not a crusader for marijuana. I am a crusader for personal freedom. I am a crusader for I can do what I want with my own body. Not talking about abortion because I believe that's another body inside a woman's, but that's another subject for later if you wish. But the marijuana one is a great example because the unforeseen consequence here, aside from telling the feds to take a hike, aside from the people of Colorado telling their own state government to take a hike, is the economic consequence. If Colorado succeeds, marijuana will be far less expensive in Colorado than it is today. That will dry up the demand for marijuana from the Mexican cartels. So this might be an experiment that would open up the eyes of governments in other states. Stated differently, if you were to take a poll amongst various interest groups in America, who wants to legalize marijuana? I dare say the group that most wants to do it? Law enforcement. Because they realize they're battling against a tide. This is against human nature. People are ultimately going to put in their bodies what they want. This is a waste of their resources. They're far better catching a bank robber than they are catching a user of marijuana. So social experiments at the state level may open up the eyes of the Victorian phonies and nanny staters around the country to realize that freedom produces more wealth and prosperity and happiness than government control does.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Your most recent book is Theodore and Woodrow, How Two American Presidents Destroyed Constitutional Freedom. I hope your book helps restore some constitutional freedom.
Always a pleasure, Nick. Thank you.
For Reason TV, I'm Nick Gillespie.
A very good friend of mine, and a guy who I don't think television does justice to. He is one of the smartest and most reasoned and best Americans I know, Judge Napolitano. He's a Fox News senior judicial analyst, and he is now the author of a book that Judge, did you write this for me? I mean, this is my book.
You gave me the idea for this all those times that we were working together down in Studio D at Fox News Channel, and you reminded me of how most of America misunderstands the progressive era and has taken these two monsters, Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt, and idolized them, whereas in reality they began the monster government that thought it could right any wrong and regulate any behavior and tax any event, which perhaps their vision culminated last Tuesday, 100 years after they started it.
Yeah, it's amazing most people don't understand, and it drives me crazy when I hear people like Newt Gingrich say, oh no, Theodore Roosevelt, he was my favorite president. The guy was a nightmare. You can take and pick and choose and say that was kind of cool and that was kind of cool, but if you know what he was really all about, especially when he started to run, after against Woodrow Wilson, this guy was a nightmare. Both of them were.
Well, it's interesting, Glenn, because they hated each other. As you know, they ran against each other, and one could argue that because of Roosevelt's arrogance and insistence that he get a third term after retiring for 4 years, he split the Republican vote, or certainly the anti-Wilson vote, between himself and William Howard Taft, who was the president and was his designated successor. But notwithstanding their animosity toward each other, Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, they really agreed on this. The Constitution does not mean what it says. It is not the supreme law of the land. It does not limit the federal government to the specific powers delegated to the federal government in the Constitution. Rather, in their view, the federal government can do anything it wants as long as it is not expressly prohibited by the Constitution. Now, that is 180 degrees from what their predecessors and from what the founders believed when they wrote the Constitution and created this republic.
So we have We have NBC announcing that they're going to do a story on a new series on George Washington, where George Washington is a philanderer, and they say it's based in historic fact. I mean, what they're going to do to him now. This kind of stuff really started with Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt, and you said culminating really in the last election. Judge, what is left of the Constitution at this point?
Well, it's a difficult question for me to answer. Difficult because, as you know, I've taken a couple of oaths to uphold it, because I believe it created a country dedicated to personal freedom, not dedicated to government aggrandizement. But all of that has changed. What is left is basically the structure of government. But the individual guarantees of liberty in there are no longer around. I'll take it to today. If the FBI, without a search warrant, can read the emails of the chief spy in the United States of America to his mistress on an issue that has no relation whatsoever to federal criminal law or national security, they can do it to anybody else.
So, Judge, Theodore and Woodrow, they start out 100 years ago to reverse things. Theodore wanted to go farther than Woodrow did, at least openly. Woodrow ended up going farther than Roosevelt said he was going to go.
Right.
When Woodrow says, when the Americans start to reject progressivism and saying, you guys are spooking the bat snot out of us, they go undercover. They set this time bomb to go off, and it just dismantles everything all the way along until we get here. How do we reverse this?
Well, they began the creation of the era of dependency, which has now reached almost the tipping point. It's almost reached 50%. When Mitt Romney in the campaign was talking about 47%, he's talking about people who rely on the government for a substantial portion of their income. Some of them are very good people who paid into the government Social Security and Medicare. Some of them are people who can't work. Most of them, many of them, are people who don't work and won't work. Nevertheless, there is nearly half the country at the present state in history relying on money either extracted from the other half or borrowed in the name of the other half for their subsistence. None of this is authorized by the Constitution, but this will continue to perpetuate itself. Up till FDR, Republicans resisted this, but when they saw how this scheme worked, promise to give money, deliver on your promises, you'll get votes in return. By the time LBJ came along, half the Republicans in the Congress voted for the expansion of the Social Security program into Medicare and Medicaid. So how does this end? This will end when the government doesn't have checks that clear anymore, when government wires into your bank account don't mean anything, or when you need a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy a loaf of bread or a gallon of gas. That will lead to a revolution.
Yeah, that leads to really bad places, because people don't even understand. They don't even look to the Constitution anymore. They don't look to the founders anymore. Those are a bunch of old guys. They're actually talking about, hey, I've heard the left say we should have people tweet ideas for their new Constitution. What? I mean, look at the work that the founders did on this. They were giants, intellectual giants. How do you put it back together? For instance, people say secession. That's not possible without war, right?
Well, listen, it's probably not possible without war. We know what Lincoln did, and we can imagine what Barack Obama would do. But Lincoln also said that with public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. If public sentiment is for secession, if public sentiment is for something peaceful yet radical to dismantle or reduce the federal government, then I think that there will be an incentive on the part of those who make these decisions to go along with public sentiment. One interesting proposal about secession is not total secession, but partial secession. The United States of America would become a federation of about 10 smaller countries, the Northeast, the Southwest, etc. And those countries would have different levels of freedom. And you could, as Ronald Reagan once said, vote with your feet. That was once the case with the states.
That's the way.
But when Woodrow Wilson destroyed the sovereignty of the states, there became next to no difference between them.
It is amazing to me. We got to go for the break, but it's amazing to me. You hit it right on the head. This is the way it was before Theodore and Woodrow. This is the way it was. We're not voting for secession. We're voting for a restoration. We don't want to break away from the other states. We just want you do in your state what you want to do. Let us do in our state what we want to do. Leave us alone, Washington. Judge, thank you very much.
Pleasure, Glenn.
I hope to see you again soon.
In Dallas next time.
You got it. Judge Napolitano, and the book is Theodore and Woodrow. You want to educate yourself? This guy nails it. Theodore and Woodrow.